for having me. Henry, can you hear me okay? I was thrilled to be asked to come and chat with you, and Erica asked if I would sort of give an overview about what choices and opportunities are going to be available based on state law. And then the various folks that follow me are going to talk about different choices that can be made specifically. And thank you to Ms. Sanders. Did she leave or she's still here? Here she is. She's one of my favorite people. I'm getting embarrassed her. She's the first principal that I ever met in the school system, because when she was Miss Pittman, she was the principal at Hawthorne Elementary where my children started, and they still love her very much, ask about her all the time, and are thrilled when they get to visit her. So she's very special to all the Jesters. So thank you for having us. So schools have to make some choices coming up, and I pulled the law that extended the deadline for that. It was coming up this year. It had previously been the case that school districts had to make some choices sometime in 2013. But that deadline has been extended now to 2015, and I believe it's currently June 30th, 2015. The law says that no later than that, each local school system shall either notify the department of its intention to request increased flexibility pursuant to this article, or shall comply. So basically, you've got to make a choice on what type of school system you're going to be, or the status quo. That is a choice. So what kinds of choices can be made? The Department of Education does have some good information about these choices on their website, and I'll put up a link to that, and I'll put it out in an email as well, and DCPC can share it on their website. So you can see a lot of what I'm going to discuss today in further detail, and drill deeper if you like on some of the specifics that I'm going to talk about. I also think there's some misinformation in the way they characterize some of the choices you can make. So if you want to follow up with me on that, just give me a call or an email. But I'll try to address that too in my presentation today. So the choices that you can make have a range of autonomy for a district down into the schoolhouse level. So you can choose to be what currently, like Gwinnett, and I believe Forsyth is currently an IB squared system, and that stands for Investing in Educational Excellence School System. And that is a very centralized approach to reform and increase student achievement and accountability. You can be a charter system, and you can be a status quo school system. So those are all more centralized mechanisms that you could choose to be. Or you could choose a strategic school system. That's sort of a new flavor they've talked about. Or you could choose to be a system of charter schools. So that's different than a charter system, okay? So when the word charter is used, you need to think about the context that is being used in. Is it a system of charter schools, or is it a charter system? Because they're different. So what are each of these things? So basically, the local school system has to enter into a contract with the state board and the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. The contract will specify, depending on the school district, what the parameters of flexibility are. So if you were to make the decision to maintain the status quo and stay a traditional school system, you will, though, according to the Department of Education, no longer be able or entitled to receive waivers. That, we often think about it in CAB and many of the local school districts as the class size waiver. Okay, so that's a waiver we've been getting for a long time. So, we've seen the increased class size. That's the one that perhaps has the biggest financial impact on the district. So if the district stays status quo, they can do that, but they will no longer get that class size waiver. So that's kind of interesting. And there are other issues with that. So you could enter into an IE squared. That's a very centralized, again, top-down management kind of thing. But you have, so you get flexibility. You can ask, and you can ask for the specific waivers. But you will, you have to meet certain higher accountability standards for your student achievement in exchange for that flexibility, and it's contractual. The one thing about IE squared that we see that we're not seeing explicitly in the other agreements is, in the contract, there's a loss of governance if a school fails to meet its targets. And that's kind of interesting. And then they spell out things that happen with the school if they do not meet their targets. I think that's kind of interesting because I'm not sure the mechanism. Yes, contractually, a district has agreed that they would lose governance if they don't meet their targets. But, you know, based on state law and the Constitution, I'm not sure the enforceability of that, how that would actually happen. So that remains to be seen, but that is in there. Then you've got a charter system. So what is that? The charter system is where the whole system enters into an agreement. There's an emphasis on school-based leadership and decision-making, okay? That's the word that the Department of Education is using. There's increased school-level autonomy and accountability, and you can get some of those waivers. There's plenty of state law and federal law you still have to follow in any of these situations. So there's an emphasis on school-based leadership, okay, in a charter system. Then a strategic school system, that's sort of a new animal. You have more, I think the view is it's almost a hybrid of the status quo. There's some limited accountability increases and some limited waivers. You can't request the largest financial impact waivers, so that would be class size, so it's sort of a hybrid of this. And then you've got a system of charters, so that would be you have to have decision-making that is school-based, okay? So that's not an emphasis on, as in the charter system, okay? So each school, along with the school system, would also have to have a contract with the state, whereas again, the charter system is one contract, and we're emphasizing, and we're going to spell out a mechanism where we're increasing autonomy in each of those schools. So a system of charters has, again, the local board and each individual school entering into contracts with the state. So, and then of course there's status quo. I sort of built that into the conversation. There's no performance contract. There's no flexibility then. No changes required. You get no waivers. You've got to comply with everything, and you have to state that. So the financially, that would be a big burden. I don't think that we can seek to have in its current financial state enter into that kind of agreement. And let's see, there's different governance strategies there, but basically what you're going to end up with is, so a charter system is still a very centralized, and it's viewed by the Department of Education under their categorization as a centralized governance system. A system of charter schools would not be. So just be careful when you're thinking about those things, and you can ask questions pursuant to that. There is some additional funding for charter systems if appropriated. So there's an incentive there. I believe there's a $100 per student funding if appropriated, and I don't know if that, I think Senator Weber, for the system, okay. And so is that something that they're going to do every year, or is that a one-time gift for it's a one-time sort of transitional payment for if you become captive? Sure, okay, so that would be the maximum any system could get. And that was my question I had, was it going to be one-time or continually appropriated? I will put links to these things, like I said, on my website, and I'll send them out to DCPC so you can avail yourself to the details, because there's a lot to read, but I just wanted to give you a high-level conversation before our subsequent panelists talk about these individual issues. I have various opinions about these things, so if you want to, ask questions about that later, I will certainly tell you what I think, and what I think the implications of the choices DeKalb makes or other school systems as well. So I look forward to hearing from our panelists, and thank you for having me.
Up next we have Mr. Weber, Mr. Dan Weber, and he is the Executive Vice President, he is the Director of the Charter System Foundation. And when we talk about this, if any of you are familiar with Decatur and Marietta, those are what we call system charters.
Good morning. It's good to see all of you. I look around the room, I see a lot of faces, a lot of familiar people I've known for many years. Senator Miller, it's good to have you here today. Many of you know that my wife, Kay, worked in DeKalb County for about 32 years. She spent time at Dunwoody Elementary, at Austin Elementary. She spent time in South DeKalb, Central DeKalb, and she also was at Peachtree Charter Middle School as principal for several years. I work as an attorney here in Dunwoody, but I'm spending half of my time now as the executive director of a nonprofit that we formed earlier this year to support charter systems. And Pam Talmadge, I'm guessing most all of you know Pam, is working with me in that effort. So we're going to talk about that in addition to talking about what charter systems are doing. Nancy did a good job of outlining the various choices, and it gets a bit confusing because there are so many different choices. But what is it that's driving all of these different choices being created by the General Assembly, state policymakers? At the core is the belief that if you give more decision-making authority and power at the schoolhouse level to teachers, parents, and community members and local business people, the decisions will be made closer to the student. Better decisions in terms of allocation of resources will be made, and each child will get a better individualized education. The counter to that is a recognition that the current model that we have in this country and in this state and in this county has proven itself over the decades not to work. And that model is a top-down model where the federal government imposes regulations on the state. There was no child left behind. Now that's going away, and we have new things that are being imposed on the state. Race to the top, for example. At the state level, state policymakers, the governor, the senators, the state reps, and I served for 6 years in the Georgia State Senate. We believe we have to do something about education. So we impose mandates and regulations and requirements from the state level to the central office. And it really doesn't work that well to really improve education. But our constituents demand it of us because they want us to do something. So you talk about class size requirements, seat time, salary schedule, a whole host of things where the central office of each school system, their hands are tied. Expenditure controls, you've got to spend X amount of money on the media center, you've got to spend Y amount of money on something else. And then in larger systems that we have in the metro area, the central office tends to impose mandates and requirements on each school. And there's a belief at the state level that that sort of top-down mandate and regulation really does not improve education. So you try to replace that with a bottom-up approach where people who know the schools the best, who know the students the best, are making the decisions. And that's the reason for all these different flavors of charter schools and charter systems and charter clusters, to put a menu of options out there for people to look at. It does get confusing when you talk about charter schools, charter clusters, charter systems. And what I would encourage you to think about, this is the way I look at it. When you talk about a charter school, think about drawing a circle around that school. State mandates and regulations are blocked in that charter. In other words, the charter is a contract, but it's also a grant of authority from the state. As a grant of authority, you don't have to meet class size requirements. You don't have to meet seat time requirements. You don't have to do expenditure controls. That's at an individual school level. In exchange for that, the school has to promise to meet higher performance standards. There are two different kinds of individual charter schools. One is what I'll call startup independent charter schools, such as KIPP Academy in Atlanta, where the nonprofit KIPP organization is the employer of the administrators and the instructional staff. And that's a huge difference. The other kind of charter school is a local conversion charter school, such as we have here in Dunwoody at the middle school and some of our elementary schools. There, the instructional staff and the administrators remain employees of the central office. That link is not broken. So they remain, even though they have charter status, they remain largely under the control of the superintendent and the central office staff. The charter cluster concept, think about a high school cluster, the middle school, and all of its feeder elementary schools. Draw a circle around it. Now that entire cluster is free from state mandates under the charter, under that grant of authority from the state. Charter clusters cannot be created, however, without the approval of the local school board. We have some excellent leadership out of the Druid Hills cluster moving toward charter cluster status. If they achieve that, that will be the first in Georgia to do that. I think that is perhaps the most innovative thing that could happen in Georgia this year if our school board sees fit to approve it. I'm a little bit biased. The charter cluster concept was the first thing that I worked on in 2005 when I was a freshman in the Georgia State Senate. Fran was there. He was in the House at that time. He was the vice chair of the House Education Committee. We had a House Education Committee meeting. It seemed like it went for 7 hours. It was the most raucous thing that I've ever seen. Fran did a masterful job of getting that legislation through so we could create charter clusters. And actually, that was a term that Pam Talmadge and I devised that Christmas of 2004 in her home in her Christmas party. But a charter cluster, again, is free from state mandates. And in exchange for that, they have to agree to perform better, meet higher performance standards. The other important thing about a charter cluster, as it's being proposed by Druid Hills, is the nonprofit would become the employer of the administrative staff and the instructional staff. So the link to the central office would largely be broken, but the central office would still play an important role in overseeing and holding that cluster accountable for what they do. So then we talk about charter system. Charter system is a law that I wrote working with the Lieutenant Governor in 2007. Again, draw the circle, this time around the entire school system. The entire school system is free from state mandates and regulations. You don't have to worry about seat time, you don't have to worry about class size. You've got a 5-year period where you're free from all state mandates. You've got to agree to meet higher performance standards. That's a charter system. It's a contract or a charter between the school board, the local school board, and the state. There are two flavors of charter systems, really. One is called charter systems, where you have to maximize school-level governance. The idea, the bottom-up idea of making decisions closer to the student. The second, really, I² is like a charter system, except you don't have to maximize school-level governance. That law was written where you get flexibility, you have accountability. If you don't perform according to your charter, individual schools would become independent startup, operate like an independent startup charter school. Now, we have 3 systems in Georgia that are IE squared. There are no other systems moving to be IE squared. There are a number of systems moving towards charter system status, where they maximize school level governance. There is a very significant deadline that Nancy referred to, summer of 2015. School systems have to decide to be IE squared, charter system, or status quo. If they don't take action, they will lose their current waivers that they have with regard to class size, seat time, and so on. Every system now in the state of Georgia has that waiver temporarily. The door will be slammed, however, in the summer of 2015, which is a huge potential impact on a system like the CAB if they don't move in the direction of charter system or IE squared. It's going to be a huge political fight down at the Capitol as to whether that date will be extended again. And I can tell you there are a lot of superintendents and local school board members around the state who are assuming that it will be extended. But there's also some very powerful people in the General Assembly who do not want to extend it because they want to force change in education. Charter system, what it's really about, and we now have 19 charter systems in the state of Georgia. We have 3 more coming. We have about 20 others who've expressed interest, started down the path. It really is about changing the culture of the school system at the schoolhouse level, giving school governing councils real authority over personnel decisions and budget decisions, curriculum decisions at the schoolhouse level. Most charter systems provide that the principal cannot be the chair of the council. And by doing that, you really create a culture of change at the schoolhouse level. Our charter system superintendents are doing some really neat things around Georgia. Most charter systems, most school systems in Georgia have only 1 high school. So a lot of our charter systems are essentially the same as charter clusters. We do have 1 large system in Fulton County that became charter system last year. They're doing some very exciting things under some good leadership. You do get funding as a charter system each year, and it does continue year after year. If DeKalb County were to become a charter system, they would get $4.5 million. Fulton County is using that as an innovation fund where their schools can compete for the money. The Charter System Foundation that we formed earlier this year was for the purpose of supporting charter systems in their efforts. We've had 2 workshops so far where our superintendents and their key staff members can come together and share ideas. One of the workshops, we had Department of Education people there all day to take questions and do presentations. If you think about our 180 school systems in Georgia, they largely operate as independent silos. There's very little sharing of information and ideas between those 180 systems. We now have a nonprofit where there is a sharing of ideas. And it's very exciting when you get a group of superintendents together in a room and they start talking with each other, because they don't have the opportunity to do that. One of them said after one of those sessions, it's like therapy. Because being a superintendent is a very lonely, very demanding job, as you know. And they love talking with each other. The foundation, I am the executive director. Pam works with me. We have 7 of our charter system superintendents who are the board of directors. We're seeing great improvements in discipline, graduation rate, and we think the study that's coming out this fall will show standardized testing. For DeKalb County, I'll just briefly say that if DeKalb County has the foresight, they will approve the Druid Hills Charter Cluster. They will become also a charter system with charter clusters in it. I think that is the most important thing that could happen. I personally believe that if you give the parents, the teachers, the administrators, the community members that level of decision-making authority, it would rejuvenate public education in DeKalb. And school board members and administration would be viewed very positive. So I apologize if I've gone over, but I enjoy talking about this. Frank?
Yeah, understand too, the state has signed off.
Yes.
The state has signed off on it. They think it's a good program too. So understand that the decision's not going to be in DeKalb County because there is no appeal in the law. But the state has come out in favor of that approach. So everybody, I want you to understand that. So we are on the same page.
Yeah, the state is encouraging DeKalb County to become a charter system that have charter clusters within the charter system.
Mr. Miller, have they approved of the Druid Hills Charter Cluster as it was written?
I'm sorry?
Have they approved of the cluster of the petition as it was originally written?
To my knowledge, they were comfortable with the entire thing, and if there was any issues, they were addressed. So to my knowledge, they signed off on that. It's a good program.
Yeah, the state is very supportive of that concept. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. To piggyback on that, now we have Mr. Andrew Lewis, and he's from GCSA to talk to us about charter clusters and the benefit that we could see from those in DeKalb.
Good morning. First and foremost, I have to apologize. My allergies are in full bloom, so I sound like Froggy from the Little Rascals. I am the Executive Vice President for Georgia Charter Schools Association. The Georgia Charter Schools Association is a 501c3 nonprofit working with the state's charter schools. We're doing a great deal of work with the current proposal with the Druid Hills community. So I'm going to use the Druid Hills Charter Cluster proposal as a backdrop to talk about charter clusters. First, a little bit about myself. I grew up just a few miles away from here in Sandy Springs. After spending nearly 10 years in the business world, went into education, saw first at city schools and theater, everywhere I live, everything what I thought was right with public education. I then became a full-time teacher at Stone Mountain Middle School, and I got to see what I thought was the flip side of public education. And I really became charged with the idea that we need to do better in public education if we're going to do what we expect for our children. So I'm here to talk a little bit about charter clusters. Again, I'm going to use the Druid Hills community as a backdrop. As Senator Weber pointed out, and I'd like to first say thank you to Senator Weber. He did create the charter cluster law back in 2005. It's just taken some time for it to materialize. Under one high school cluster, a petition is brought forth. For the Druid Hills community, that includes 7 schools, the high school, the middle school, 5 elementary schools. 4 of those elementary schools are Title I schools. It is very important to note that the Druid Hills community, as they started this process nearly a year ago, it was an organic process that involved parents, it involved teachers, it involved administrators. It was getting everybody involved. It was going to every single school. It was getting many different stakeholders participating and aligning those thoughts over many months, many hours, many evenings. As you can see by the third box, one of the most important things that you will note is if this cluster is approved, all children within the attendance zone of the Druid Hills High School will be served. There are rumors floating that some students are not going to be able to be served because of the Druid Hills cluster going in this new direction. Nothing could be further from the truth. By law, they must serve every child within their cluster. This gives you a little bit of an idea of what makes up the Druid Hills cluster. I think for a lot of people, especially the DeKalb, the immediate thought is when you hear Druid Hills, it is thought that it is mostly white, mostly middle to upper class. But if we look at the Druid Hills cluster more closely, it is the single most diverse cluster in DeKalb County schools, with 61% of the student body being African American, 18% being white, 10% Hispanic, Asian, and 7% Hispanic. So as a cluster, again, as Senator Weber mentioned, it will be governed, if accepted, by a 501c3 nonprofit board. A board made up of individuals with varied backgrounds. An individual that has a background as an attorney. An individual that has a background in education. But competent individuals that have a desire to see the Druid Hills cluster be able to achieve levels that they felt they were not able to achieve previously. Point number 2, with the principals and school leadership, empowering principals to be what they should be, the directors at their school. Empowering the high school principal to be more or less the CEO, the director of the entire cluster, where she is as responsible and as attentive to how students are performing at all 5 elementary schools as she would be for the high school. Because it is not 7 individual schools. It is one K-12 cluster pipeline. Being a charter, there is a formula for all charters. And that formula is flexibility under state law. Here in Georgia, that is Title 20, to allow innovative practices, autonomy through self-governance, in exchange for accountability. As a charter, or as a charter cluster, if the DeKalb County Schools, if their board on Monday approves this cluster, the 501c3 nonprofit governing board will have flexibility under the law, will have the autonomy to make decisions in the best interest of their 7 schools and their cluster community. And the DeKalb County Board of Education retains accountability to be able to hold the Druid Hills cluster accountable to what's in their charter. And if they're not, if the cluster is not living up to what's in their charter, they run the risk of losing their charter, and the cluster reverts back to traditional public schools. Innovative practices being added, like choice, at all 5 elementary schools. One of the areas that is, I think, most important with regards to the flexibility is allowing that governing board and the schools under the cluster be able to prioritize expenditures in their budgets, allowing for less administrative overhead and more money going directly into classrooms. The cluster would be responsible for 97% of the funding for 7 schools and nearly over 5,000 students. 3% would go back to DeKalb County schools for overhead purposes. So looking at the process, these individuals within the Druid Hills community, parents, administrators, teachers, other stakeholders, spent 8 months, pretty much twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, in the evenings, scheduled for a couple of hours, typically going much longer, breaking up into 6 different groups, all with the single purpose of we are going to be working together to put a cluster proposal on behalf of the Druid Hills community before the DeKalb County Board of Ed. What I think is one of the most important parts of that process, when it started, you had 7 individual schools. These schools were often torn apart by many of the issues of the day within DeKalb County. But after many, many weeks, instead of having principals and community leaders from 7 schools thinking about their individual school, the conversation shifted. And that conversation shifted to talking about one Druid Hills cluster, one K-12 pipeline, and how working together they could serve all students within that high school cluster. Before sending their proposal to DeKalb County Board of Ed and DeKalb County School District to review, they had to take a vote within the community. It is very infrequent when you see 92% of any voting go one way. There were over 1,200 votes cast. 92% of the community voted in favor of saying, we support this idea, this concept, and we feel this is a proposal that the DeKalb County Board of Ed should take up. In my mind, this is the most important slide. What does an approval of the Druid Hills Charter Cluster mean for the DeKalb County Board of Ed? It is simply shifting the role of the DeKalb County Board of Ed from a traditional management and control governance style to a contemporary oversight governance style. The DeKalb County Board of Ed holds the Druid Hills 501c3 nonprofit board accountable for their results. And if that cluster is not hitting their targets, they run the risk of losing their charter. It does not take away the Druid Hills community from DeKalb County Schools. It simply shifts what that relationship has looked like over the years. I do have information about the proposal and information about charter schools that I will have on the table, and anybody is welcome to it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, my apologies for my raspy voice. Yes?
When the superintendent came out here, he said we don't need to treat everybody the same. And I guess this is going to be, when we find out if we're going to treat everybody the same. And I've heard people in this room to contact their office prior to this vote, as well as the various school board members, let them know your thoughts on this. Because I think this is probably the most important vote we're going to have on education in our life. And it's going to determine the future of where we go, so next year, General Assembly and other areas, depending what happens.
I do think it is something that we do not think of often enough, and that is our individual responsibility to let our elected officials know our opinion, whether that's a local board or a House or Senate member. That is our responsibility as a citizen. So I agree with you completely.
Moving right over to Mr. Arnold. Mr. Arnold is the Region 3 Superintendent for DeKalb County School District, and he will be talking to us about how DeKalb is approaching this decision.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak today. As has been mentioned, all districts have been afforded the option by the General Assembly as well as by the Department of Education to be given the opportunity to make some very important decisions regarding the future of the district and the governance of the district. In her presentation, Ms. Jester talked about these options that include the IU squared option, charter system option, the status quo option, as well as the other options that come out of the charter option, which is a system of charter clusters, a system of charter schools. There's also the strategic school option as well. And as Mr. Weber pointed out in his presentation, the deadline to make this decision on this option is June 30, 2015. Currently, the state will not allow any other flexibility or allowances from Title 20 requirements after that point. So the district has developed a timeline to respond to this and to see what is the best option for the district and how we need to go about making sure that we approach this problem, not this problem, but this opportunity to take advantage of the flexibility that's been afforded to the different districts across the state. So, what the district has done is basically divided our timeline into 4 sections. So our first section right now deals with the current date right now until the end of this calendar year. What the district is going to focus on is developing a flexibility advisory committee. This committee will be comprised of employees, parents and community members, as well as possible board members. The purpose of the FAC is to make sure that all elements associated with the best flexibility option for the district are reviewed. But this includes, but is not limited to, the waiver from Title 20, fiscal impacts associated with the choice, governance implications and accountability, performance evaluations, and consequences associated with any of these options. The Flexibility Advisory Committee, which will also be known as FAC for short, will be holding its first meeting no later than December 13th, and as I stated, will be comprised of board members, employees, and parents and community members. The second stage of this timeline focuses on January of 2014 and running until May 1st, 2014. The work of the FAC will continue as the final recommendation is drafted and presented to the superintendent by March 1st, 2014. This recommendation will then be presented to the board by April 14th, 2014, and work would begin immediately should an IE squared or charter option be selected. As this process moves forward, the FAC would monitor any work done by an additional committee to start drafting the petition or drafting a contract with the Georgia Department of Education and the Governor's Office of Student Achievement as it's related to the 90-squared option, to make sure that the original vision that was developed by the members of the FAC is maintained and remains intact. The reason why we end on the May 1st deadline is because at that point the state requires letters of intent to be sent to them, letting them know which direction, which option the district would choose. The third stage of this timeline runs from approximately May 1st, 2014 until October 31st, 2014. And it's at this point, depending on which direction, which option the district chooses, the timelines start to differ. For the charter option, if that option were to be selected, drafting the charter petition would continue during May, June, and July, with the petition being completed and presented to the board for adoption approximately in August of 2014. During August and September, 2 required public hearings for the charter petition will be conducted by the board, and the charter petition will be submitted to the Department of Education by October 31st, 2014. The deadline is November 1st of that same year. The I-squared option will require a meeting with the Georgia Department of Education and the district in July, with the board holding a required public hearing on the I-squared option in August. By September 2014, the district will begin negotiations with the Georgia Department of Education, as well as the Governor's Office of Student Achievement regarding the I-squared performance contract. Should the district choose a status quo option, and that be recommended from the FAC, a required public hearing would be held in July, and the appropriate documentation with the Georgia Department of Education will be filed. After the November 1st, 2014 date, at that point, all the documentation is turned over, and the decisions are turned over to the Department of Education. During this time, the Georgia Department of Education will review our documentation and forward to the State Board of Education their appropriate recommendations. By July 1 of 2015, in keeping with the timeline, the district would begin to operate under its selected flexibility option. So the district is approaching this opportunity with a very clear timeline and wants definitely to include multiple stakeholders in this plan. By doing so, we hope to be able to include and make the best option for the district, so that the opportunities that are afforded to us with this flexibility option will be able to be taken advantage of, and the district can make the best decision moving forward for the system and our students. Thank you.
And now we move into a different district, or a different direction. What we were talking about was opportunities for DeKalb if we stay with DeKalb as a whole. Next we have Mr. Tom Taylor with the House of Representatives here to talk to us about HR 486, which is the independent school district option.
Morning. I'm Tom Taylor. I represent the entire city of Dunwoody, portions of Chamblee and portions of Dorville, the State House. I replaced Fred, well, I should say, I sit the seat that Fred had. Nobody could replace Fred in the House. A little bit of background. Sorry. Okay, lean over. A little bit of background on this. The state constitution limits the number of school districts to 180. History on that is in 1945, they rewrote the Constitution, 159 county systems, and they grandfathered in 21 existing city school systems at that time, capped it. And it's basically said there shall be no more school systems established in the state. Prior to that, the Constitution allowed from 1877 to 1945 any municipal subdivision of the state to establish their own school system at will. Basically, what 1945 change the Constitution did was the counties did not want competition from smaller systems or cities moving away and tried to consolidate that. In the context of that, in 1945, Georgia was still a very agrarian state, and you had very small municipalities, county populations were very low. I don't think they anticipated school systems with 100,000 or, in the case of Gwinnett, 168,000 students. In the context of that, in 1945, DeKalb County had about 10,000 students in the entire school system. We've got about 8,000 in Dunwoody right now. Background on this is what motivated me to drop this bill was the SACs putting DeKalb County school system on probation. When the governor removed the school board, and I don't include Nancy as one of the ones that needed to be removed, it was just by law. What ended up happening was out of the DeKalb delegation of 23 members, only 6 of us stood with the governor in approving that and removal of the school board. That means that the rest of the folks were satisfied with the status quo, which is a failing system, which is unacceptable to me. The new school board, the feds moved back the election date for next year. The new school board will be elected on May 20th next year. I am confident that you'll see a lot of the folks that left come back, and in that context, drop the bill, which is a House Resolution 486, and you can look that up online. The City Council took a vote unanimously last December to urge the legislature to form an independent school system or look for this constitutional change. The bill has contemplated, as Fran will tell you, that outside the metro area, the largest employers in counties are school boards and hospitals. And many of our legislative cohorts have sons, daughters, wives that work in the school systems. So outside the metro area, there'd be a lot of resistance to any change to this. The bill, as we constructed it, basically allows any city formed since 2005, which would be the Norfolk cities of Sandy Springs, Milton, Johns Creek, the DeKalb cities of Dunwoody and Brookhaven, and the Gwinnett city of Peachtree Corners, to form an independent school system if this constitutional resolution passes. It also allows you to cross county lines. You can combine those systems, so you can have a lot of permutations. You could have, and this is not saying it's going to happen, but what it would allow is you could have a Dunwoody Brookhaven school system. You could have a Dunwoody Sandy Springs school system. You could have a Norfolk school system separate from it. It also allows any cities adjoining, immediately contiguous to those, to do that too. So then you have a possibility of a Dunwoody, Brookhaven, Chamblee, Doraville. Like I said, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it just allows those permutations to happen for economies of scale. We had the first hearing last March, very favorable. We're moving forward. Legislation, basically, this is the constitutional change. It allows the formation of these school systems. If this were to pass, and this is a high hurdle because the constitutional amendment requires 2/3 in both houses and then a state referendum. So I'm not underselling how hard this is going to be. But when Dan Weber, called a bunch of us together in 2005, I said, no, you're never going to get a new city in DeKalb, and we're standing it. So, I have faith in this. We were able to do it. If that were to pass, the following session, we would have to put in what's called enabling legislation, which is kind of analogous to a city charter, where you'd actually say, okay, the constitutional amendment that allows this. Then you'd look and say, okay, within the communities, does Dunwoody want to form an independent school system? Do we want to form, with other cities? Again, this is conjecture. The constitutional amendment is what we need to focus on right now. Schedule. This session is going to be extremely short. The Fed's moving the primaries out this year. We will go into session January 13th by Constitution. We have 40 legislative days. The 2 days I've heard, and Fran, if you've heard anything different, let me know, are March 18th and March 22nd to end, which is very, very ambitious. We usually are out of there, a week before the Masters. It's what dictates the legislative schedule. But it's going to be very ambitious. We're going to have to kick this off very quickly. I'll be putting out schedules as soon as we know when we're going to get hearings. As y'all may know, it's going to be a tough thing. It requires a supermajority, analogous to the Milton County vote. This may not happen this session, but you've got to start somewhere. The City of Dunwoody paid for and has commissioned a study with the Georgia Public Policy Institute and Georgia Tech that is scheduled to be delivered at the next City Council meeting. It is very close to being finished. They were just tweaking a few numbers. Imagine that there were some disparate numbers between what DeKalb reported and what the state reported in revenues and things like that. The entering assumptions here is, and I'm using Dunwoody, the folks from Chamblee, we had a basis study on something. And so what the baseline was, City of Dunwoody, current levels of service and current millage rate, which is 23.98 mils, which is one of the highest in the state. At the current millage rate, that would give an independent school system revenues here in Dunwoody. And again, this is not saying that this could include Chamblee or Sandy Springs or whatever, but we had a basis study on something that would far exceed the expenditures right now. Exceed it to the amount of, would be more than the City of Dunwoody's current operating budget, over $20 million. The big shift comes from an increase in the revenue from property taxes to the Dunwoody system, and the shift on the federal and state levels, the redistribution to poor areas that would basically almost be a wash. At current rate, your tax bill wouldn't change, the allocation of buckets would, assuming we hold millage at current levels. Currently, DeKalb County spends $118 million a year in district costs already, the central office. If you were to have an independent school system here in a city, you could vastly reduce that overhead. I know we're short on time here, but remember the costs in the independent school system are reflected in schoolhouse costs, which includes instruction, maintenance and operations, transportation, media, people services, school administration, food services. What we use as an assumption in the school system would be the central office currently at a $10 million level. Currently, the Dunwoody tax digest pays about $14.3 million into the DeKalb budget for those services. Getting off the weeds here a little bit, that surplus could be used to, for reduced classroom sizes, curriculum enhancements. But that's getting the cart ahead of the horse really right now. You could have a lot of things you can do with that. The big thing is to get the constitutional amendment passed. Conclusion is, an independent school system is certainly feasible at current millage rates. The effect on DeKalb County would result in DeKalb losing about $80 per student per year, or about $9 per month. Total of about $7.3 million to the DeKalb school system. That is less than 1% of their current budget. Their current I should say their budget, their expenditures, which is different. The most important thing here, I think the most significant thing here is at a local level, the inability to hide plots, basically, or cost. You don't have a huge central office or background operations or IT and things like that. You don't have the ability to a smaller system, a right-sized system of 8,000 students, to take a non-performing teacher or a non-performing administrator and move them to another school where they become the 5th vice principal or something like that. The family and friends theory. Most functions we handle at the school level. I would imagine in this vision, a very small central office, and most things we handle at a very local level. There's been a few rumors floating around, you've seen them prior, where the Dunwoody City Council would appoint the school board or something like that. That's a contrary to state law. What would happen is you'd be a totally separate government, like it is in the cabinet, every other system in the state. It would be separate from city government. What would end up happening is you would elect, a school board, and they would hire a superintendent, much like any system, and they would not just be another department of city administration. The bellwether to me is November 15th. You're going to see whether DeKalb County School Board approves the Druid Hills Charter Cluster. Now, if they approve it as is, I would be ecstatic, because that opens the path for the charter cluster period. I'm not confident in that though, and that's why I'm moving forward with this, because if you have a charter without teeth, without the actual control, if you strip that out, it's not. To me, it sounds nice and it's window dressing, but it doesn't really work. I'm just taking a little more radical path, and I think I'm out of time here, so we can still put up my things for questions.
And I think it might be helpful if we could have our panelists maybe move to the front so that we could address questions from the audience. It is not required, so we'll reach all the way over to you. But if we have questions from the audience, if you could stand up, and Don, if you want to help me go back, and we'll start with Allegra in the back. And just if you have the person you'd like to address the question to, just go ahead and let us know who they are and ask your question nice.
My question actually is for Mr. Arnold. charters, we have 3 conversion charters. We have been told by DeKalb County that they will not meet with us until February because there are no direct guidelines on how our petitions should be written. Our letters of intent for all 3 schools, 2 elementaries as well as the middle school, are due February 4th. We have asked for them to meet with the 3 schools so that we can have Peachtree and Chestnut Peaks to come together. We've been told there are no guidelines. So, if there are no guidelines, what exactly is Druid Hills following, and how is DeKalb saying yay or nay to this petition if other conversions are being told they're no?
Okay, I think I understand the question correctly. Please let me know if I'm not. You currently have some petitions that are waiting to be heard by DeKalb County, and you want to make sure that, number one, you meet the deadline for the letter of intent is due to the state, and also how those current charter petitions would fare should the district choose other options in the flexibility allowance, like the charter system option, IU squared option, and so forth. Is that?
Well, the 3 petitions are not, they're in the beginning of the rewrite stage.
Right, these are conversions, correct?
They're conversions.
Oh, right.
We've been told to hold off on those rewrites because the guidelines have not been set that we can follow to have petitions that would be accepted by DeKalb as well as by the state.
Okay, and I don't know if I can address the specific nature of those guidelines, because those may be related to the state guidelines. I will follow up with that and get a response back to you to make sure I know the team and who I need to speak to is Dr. Jose Boza. I'll make sure we
He's the
can.
gentleman that gave me we will not meet with you until February.
Okay, I will speak to him and find out what's the status on that. One thing that I can say in relation to the way the law is written, and certainly Mr. Weber and others can correct me if I'm wrong, but current conversion or startup charters, should they be in existence if the district goes with a charter district option, would be allowed to maintain their charter. They would not be incorporated into the district if it chose a charter district option. They would maintain their individual charter with the state. So in other words, if at that time there's a conversion charter or even a startup charter in place within the district, and if the FAC were to recommend and the board were to recommend and decide to go with a charter district option, those startup and conversion charters will maintain their petitions with the state. Because that's what the charter option boils down to, is who is the petition with? Who is it between the state and what entity? I think Mr. Weber did a great job of describing it with the circles. So if that charter petition exists with the state and the school, then that charter petition still exists, even if the district were to decide to do the district option. If the district does go with the district option, one thing that is unique about this, and is mentioned in DOE documents as well as I think part of the Georgia Code, is that all the schools within the district become a conversion charter. So if the district were to say, we're going to go with the conversion district option as the city of Decatur has, all of the schools become conversion charter schools with their own governance system and their own accountability requirements associated with that independent individual school. So the law is written to allow that individuality and that local level of governance to be maintained, whether the district goes with that charter option, whether it goes with a system of charter schools or a system of charter clusters, or if a conversion or charter school already exists.
I'd like to add to that I also serve on the Charter Advisory Committee at the state level, appointed by the Lieutenant Governor. We review all charter policy, and in particular charter systems. I can tell you that right now that if the DeKalb were to become a charter system, the degree to which your school governing council would have local decision-making authority for your school would increase well above what you currently experience as a conversion charter school. You would have the option, it's not mandatory, but you would have the option for Chestnut, Kingsley, and Peachtree to join the charter system and have your school governing council convert to a charter system governing council, and really then enjoy a greater degree of flexibility. So in most charter systems that have gone to charter systems where they have conversion charter schools, most of those conversion charter schools have opted into the charter system. as a charter system, charter school?
Federal law, my understanding of federal law as it applies to charter schools is that you may not have enrollment preferences of any type beyond the city. DeKalb County has a very robust magnet program, and many of these programs do have test score requirements, audition requirements, things of this nature. I just heard said that if we go with a charter system, every single school will become not only like a conversion charter, but more robust than a conversion charter. How can the state promise what the federal government denies? And how does that interlead with what we do have now in the way of schools like Kittredge or DSA, who in many cases are our schools with the more robust school councils and a greater inherent capacity for self-governance? And I'll let any of you out there want to answer that.
I don't think it would change from what we currently have in the
So it
magnet
would be
program.
all charter, but it would not comply with the federal requirements for charter.
I'll tell you that I'm not familiar with that. Are you saying that under federal law, the only thing that can be taken into account is a sibling?
You can
Relationship?
have you can have the child of a government board member.
Okay.
And this was vetted through legislative council because I was downtown when we put that language into the law, and it had to be carefully vetted because federal law
Put it in.
includes these preferences.
To put it into state law.
Yeah, it could not be
Yeah.
put in state law.
Because state law is consistent with that, but nevertheless, we have magnet schools where children are
But
allowed to
a
attend.
magnet cannot be a charter. There's a very careful separation in the case of Chamblee charter between the aspect of the school that is a charter and the aspect of the school that is a magnet. And I sat through some renewals of that petition, and it was carefully crafted.
I didn't know there was that kind of separation, but what I would say to you is the charter system option is designed to allow a great deal of flexibility in the way the charter is written and structured between the local school board and the state. And it's flexible enough that those kinds of considerations and divisions could be maintained.
Well, I mean, there are many things the school council law allows, but that as a culture, we have not within the tab encouraged or made available.
Yes,
I mean, it's the difference between may and must, and we tend to do only what we must.
I understand. Yeah.
Andrew has it. Yeah, Andrew.
One thing that needs to be thought about, the federal government requires 17 individual points before an individual school can be considered a charter school meeting the federal definition. The feds do allow states to have broader interpretations of chartering, but that does not necessarily mean that every charter, whether in Georgia or other states, meet the federal definition. Charter systems meet the state definition, but do not meet the federal definition of chartering. So there is a difference between the federal interpretation and the state.
Can you expand on that? Can you expand on what we start talking about, meeting a federal definition? Can you give a concrete example of what not meeting it would mean?
Sure.
I'm asking for us to provide a little more specifics when we say there is a difference between a federal requirement for a charter versus a state. A very specific example of how the state would not meet the federal example. What is an example of one of those differences?
I live in the city of Decatur, which is a charter system. They do wonderful, wonderful work, but city schools in Decatur does not meet the federal definition. One, there is no school choice within the district of City of Decatur. 2, the federal government has determined that while you have school leadership councils at all of the City of Decatur schools, they are not classifying those school leadership councils as governing boards that have the same responsibilities that down the road from us, the museum school or international community school, that their governing boards take responsibility over for their entire school.
So what that means is that if the CAB were to become a charter system under state law, every school would be a charter school in the sense that it has flexibility under state mandates. But we come very close to we would then become very close to meeting the federal definition of charter school, but we would not. On the other hand, KIPP Academy or Peachtree Charter Middle School, when it became a charter school, got a couple $100,000 from federal funds as a result of that. That federal money would not be available to each individual school throughout the CAB if you become a charter system. For that reason, Hall County is going through the process of becoming a system of individual charter schools so they can get that one-time federal hit instead of being a charter system. So it's a choice. It's really a technicality in the way the federal law is written. In substance, I don't think there's a big difference in the way the schools operate, but that's the consequence of the way federal law is written and interpreted. Lynn?
So, first, last week I spent several days in small rural school systems. And there, in my mind, though causation and effect can be debated, there is no doubt small, much poorer systems are doing a better job for their students than most of the big urban systems in Metro Atlanta. I went to two schools that had moderate, over 50% free and reduced lunch, way up to the 80s, and they both had graduation rates in the 90 percentile rate. 96.7 is over 55%. Because these small school systems can design their programs to meet the needs and the desires of their students. There's not 7 or 9 people sitting 20 miles away dictating what has to happen in every school. So my first preference in terms of flexibility is individual school systems. Nobody, when the law was changed, envisioned the school system of 165,000 students down the street doing that. So no one envisioned that. My question, though, is the difference between the words shall and should, may and must, because I've been in the commercial charter school business a really long time, and since the initiation of the charter schools, essentially. And the problem, this is really for you, Dan, the concern I have is the ability for a school to control their own destiny within a school system is when the law says may or can, as opposed to must and shall. Because in the conversion world, we all know the difference between those words. So when we say we shall hire our own principal, and the school system strikes the word and changes it to may or can, it changes the total meaning of that sentence. And so in your work with charter systems, are you really seeing, because I've been around a long time, global controls with the Banner Valley, are you really seeing middle management of large school systems or school systems at all stepping out of the way and letting schools control their own destiny?
So just for people who couldn't hear, I think the question is through the system charter, are we seeing that there is control being relinquished down to the schoolhouses? Yes? Is that a good summarization? Perfect. And
Lynn, those are great points, great question. Let me share with you that at the end of 2012, when I had proposed the idea of this nonprofit foundation for charter systems, I traveled around the state and went to many of the existing charter systems. Most of them are single high school systems. And I met with their school boards and proposed the idea, and it was a wonderful experience because you have 5 or 7 members, they all live in the same community, it's very diverse, white, black, Hispanic. You can tell there's sort of a getting along or a friendship or even a love in the room you don't really see in the larger systems. But in terms of does charter system really allow school level governance in a meaningful way, which is really what you're asking. That was the biggest fight we had in the General Assembly in 2007, was that wording that requires the school system to maximize school level governance. Very hard fought. And we came up with a little bit of a compromise. I will say that in the charter systems that we have, they really are doing it. But it takes leadership from the superintendent for that to happen. Because it's not the school board that's sharing authority, it's the superintendent that's sharing authority and governance. On the negative side, we did have one school system that was very strong in the charter system effort. New superintendent came in. They had to do a RIF policy, to meet a RIF across the system to meet school budget demands. It did not involve their school level governance team in that decision at all. The Charter Advisory Committee and the State School Board became very concerned about that, and investigation has been done, and there's a good chance that school system will be put on probation. They're up for renewal. We're recommending that they only get a 2-year renewal, and we're also working on state law right now to try to make changes to address this concern so that that does not happen again. But if you were to come to one of our workshops and meet our charter system superintendents, they are the ones that drive this idea. They want parents like you and teachers like we have in this room to buy into the process. Because they understand that if you make a hiring decision or recommendation, or you make a budget decision for your school, you can't complain about it. You've bought into it. And it creates a great deal of excitement at the schoolhouse level for things that can actually change. They will also tell you that it's difficult to get teachers and parents and community members to think differently, that you really can't have this kind of decision-making authority. A lot of training goes along with it. So there's mostly positive in that respect, but there is some negative that we're trying to battle against.
Unfortunately, we are not going to have time for more questions. We've got little ones already coming in for lunch, but Nancy Jester wanted to add one more comment, and then 2 things before we move to Nancy's comment. One, our December, this is the part where I have AD brain. Our December 4th meeting is going to be an evening meeting, and if you look on your agendas, you'll see that it is focused on what you need to know to give your child the best chance for getting into a college entrance, college readiness. And that will be an evening meeting. Look for information on our website and also through school news or our Facebook page for the time and location for that. Hopefully we'll be at Dunwoody High School for that event. And the other thing that I wanted to mention really quickly was that we have got a lot of wonderful people up here who have great answers. I know you guys have a lot of questions. If you go onto our website, the DCPC website, you can find our emails. Email us questions. We also do have a DCPC Dunwoody Chamblee Parent Council Facebook page. Post your questions on there, send them a message to us, and what we can do is get the questions to our panelists and post those questions for you all to get see the answers to them. We'll let Nancy talk and then wrap up.
We'll clear out the cafeteria as soon as we're finished here. I'll keep it short. I just wanted to reiterate Lynn's concerns, and I do think the gold standard is Tom's bill and an independent school district. There's nothing that would be better for kids and taxpayers in our area and the state, and that includes all of DeKalb, not simply the areas that form their own independent school districts. And we do know there is ample evidence out there. Michigan has a recent study on it. They studied about the savings, the cost savings they would incur by consolidating their small districts, because that was the first thought they had was, well, they cost us a lot of money, and they indeed were going to save money by consolidating the very small districts. We have many of those in South Georgia. But they found out that the cost savings from breaking up the larger districts was 12 times as great as consolidating the small districts. So from a taxpayer perspective, it's clear, the evidence is clear, not just in Michigan, but in other places. Then when you look at student achievement, it is clear that the smaller districts outperform. If you look around at our smaller districts in Georgia and compare them to the large Metro 8 districts, and you look at across all demographics, they're outperforming. Look at City of Valdosta compared to DeKalb, and you will see exactly what Lynn pointed out. My own thoughts about charter systems is, again, it's even under the context of the Department of Education's own presentation, a centralized governance perspective. That's how they have categorized it. And there is may and can and emphasize versus must and will as far as pushing and mandating that governance go to the control of the schoolhouse. So that's my own perspective. And I do think some places could accomplish a system and do it well. I do not believe that could be the case in DeKalb. I do not think we have the ability to make that happen, a charter system perspective, currently as things stand. Could that change? I suppose. I have met with the Hall County Superintendent, and Lynn brought that up, and I just wanted to touch base. They're doing the individualized approach. It's very wise. Their superintendent has no problem relinquishing power to the schools. He wants to give them the schools that they want, and they've done some amazing things there. I encourage everybody to look into Hall County and what they've done. He's an amazing person. So, close it with that. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you again, President.